Hello there. Welcome to Just the Discs. We talk about Blu-rays here and 4Ks, and today I am talking about a couple 4Ks from Paramount Home Video, two classics from two very different eras, one from the 1980s and one from the 1950s. Let's start with the more modern of the two, a true 80s classic, that is Ferris Bueller's Day Off from 1986, written and directed by John Hughes, starring, of course, Matthew Broderick in the title role, with a supporting cast including Alan Ruck as Cameron, Mia Sara as Sloane, Jeffrey Jones as Ed Rooney, Edie McClurg as his secretary, Grace, and Jennifer Grey as his sister, Charlie Sheen. There's a lot of great folks in this movie. All about a young guy who is in his senior year of high school and decides he's going to take a day off, his ninth sick day, and make the most of it. And he is a fascinating character, Ferris Bueller, that is. And he's played incredibly well by Matthew Broderick, in a career-defining role. Really, he's just truly a guy who has a confidence about him that is amazing, and he has really figured everything out. Figured out how to fake out his parents, how to take the day off, and not be bothered, even when things don't go quite right. In terms of getting Sloane, his girlfriend, out of school, getting his friend Cameron to come over and pick him up, and eventually getting Cameron to sort of let him take his dad's incredibly expensive classic automobile, the signature automobile of the piece, into Chicago, and to pick up Sloane because of a mistake in terms of getting Rooney, the principal, to let her out of school. Anyway, everybody's seen this movie. There's no need for me to explain it, but it is great. It's nice to see it on this new 4K Steelbook. And a few things I noticed this time. One, in particular, it's edited by Paul Hirsch, who is Brian De Palma's editor, used on a ton of De Palma's films, and I hadn't realized that until this particular viewing. But let's talk about the features. Now, this is a 4K only. There's no Blu-ray included with this. Sometimes these steelbooks have both, and typically what we see is that the 4K doesn't have any features on it. The 4K disc maybe has a commentary, but they've decided to save, bitrate space and only put the movie on there. Not in this case, fortunately or unfortunately. So we have all the features on this 4K, and there's some good ones. These are all ported over, I believe. None of these are brand new, so you won't be getting anything brand new other than a new 4K scan. Does it mention anything about the scan on here? It does not specifically, but it looks great. I mean, the movie looks very, very good to me. But these features are pretty wonderful. One in particular that stands out to me is the commentary from John Hughes himself. Now, this goes back to the DVD of Ferris and was then absent from at least one Blu-ray release, so I'm glad it's been put back, because this is actually kind of a low-key favorite commentary of mine. Hughes did not do a lot of commentaries. In fact, don't quote me, but this may be one of the only movies that he did a full commentary on, and that may say something about how he felt about the film. I do find it interesting also, this doesn't come out in the commentary, it comes out in some of the other features, but there's some rumors of him having written this script in less than 3 weeks, because there was a looming writer's strike, and it's a pretty great script. It's arguably one of his best, scripts, and one of his best movies that he ever made. So that's pretty remarkable. He was a fast writer, as I understand. Anyway, the commentary is really solid. He's a soft-spoken, but obviously very intelligent guy, and he's very candid and offers a lot of behind the scenes talk. He talks about song choices. He gives little bits about, little tidbits like Mr. and Mrs. Bueller, the actors themselves, got married after this movie. So the opening scene with the parents and Ferris, Matthew Broderick, and Jennifer Grey. Jennifer Grey and Matthew Broderick were actually dating at the time, so he's like, all 4 people in this scene are in love, things like that. He talks about casting choices, things that go into the character of Ferris, which, he seems to have obviously really deep insight into, relates to. Who the character of Cameron was based on, was an old friend of his. How they shot some stuff at the Breakfast Club High School, was apparently abandoned high school. He talks in depth about the relationship between Principal Rooney and his secretary Grace, and how much time he spent on that relationship, which I think is funny. And Matthew Broderick and Alan Ruck having worked together a lot on Broadway, and how that made them so much better together. Like, they just already had a rapport, and so that makes sense that these 2 actors would play off each other so well. Why'd you kick me? Where's your brain? Why'd you kick me? I asked you first. Sorry. Just little dialogue bits that come into my head. I remember I saw this film at a drive-in theater in 1986, and I remember my family was pulling out of the, parking area, and that credit sequence was running with, Rooney getting on the bus. And so we didn't even really get to see the, Ferris coming out at the end. What are you still doing here kind of stuff. But it was definitely a movie that made an impression at the time, and people weren't doing those stingers, and it's one of the all-timers really still. Anyway, let's see here. And it's funny, in that bit, Hughes admitted to having never ridden a bus in his life throughout all 4 years of high school, including field trips. How somehow he was able to avoid that. I thought that was fascinating. This guy who, made so many high school movies, never rode a bus. And a bus scene is in most of his movies, you know what I mean? So anyway, so that's a really great commentary, and one that I really cherish. There are a bunch of other extra featurettes that are included here. Getting the class together, the cast of Ferris Bueller's Day Off, which is about 27 minutes and 45 seconds. And this really talks to a lot of people in both, new interviews, new in quotes. I don't know when they were done. They're not 2023 interviews, but, and then some archival interviews that are done circa 1986, maybe during the making of the film. But they talked to Jane Jenkins and Janet Hershenson, the casting directors, and then, of course, Matthew Broderick, John Hughes in an archival interview, Alan Ruck, Mia Sara, archival, Jennifer Grey, archival, and new interviews, Ferris's dad and mom, those actors, Jeffrey Jones, Edie McClurg, Ben Stein, Richard Edson, Christy Swanson, the maitre d' at the restaurant. I mean, they really go deep in terms of the cast, and it's neat to hear everybody's story about how they got cast and their memories of, getting on board with the film. So that's it really complements the next feature, which is the making of Ferris Bueller's Day Off, which is 15 and a half minutes. And that includes on-set footage, talking to a lot of the same folks that are in this cast interview. Now they're talking about John Hughes. They're talking more about on-set stuff and making the movie, as opposed to how they got involved. So it's really kind of an extension of that. So you really can say that the making of and the casting make up about a 45-minute, all told making of piece, which is neat. And then there's Who is Ferris Bueller, which is about 9 minutes, and that's John Hughes from a 1987 interview, Jeffrey Jones, Matthew Broderick, Jennifer Grey, Alan Ruck, all talking about the character Ferris Bueller, what he is, what makes him him, etc. And then The World According to Ben Stein, which is almost 11 minutes long. That's just an extended interview with Stein talking about his career, etc. And then Vintage Ferris Bueller, The Lost Tapes, about 10 minutes and 16 seconds of the actors messing around on set. It's Broderick and Ruck, Broderick interviewing Jeffrey Jones. I think Matthew Broderick is in most of the bits, but they're mostly just fooling around on set or interviewing each other or whatever. But it's very charming and very nice to have. So you've got a lot of features here. It's, like I said, a good looking transfer to my eyes. and a nice new update of a classic from John Hughes, Ferris Bueller's Day Off on 4K. Now, coming back to the 50s, we have Roman Holiday, William Wyler's film from 1953, starring Gregory Peck and Audrey Hepburn and Eddie Albert. And this one is, a classic. It is a classic in its own right, much like Ferris. Shot in its entirety in Rome, and William Wyler had to fight for that, apparently, because it was very much a time of studio-bound films, and there was no way that Paramount were going to let him do that, but he fought for it, and the movie is so much better because of it, and so much more memorable because of the Rome location shooting. But the basic story is of a princess, crown princess, played by Audrey Hepburn, who some people forget, I know I did, that this was her really breakout discovery role. Like, she had been an actor on Broadway, was known in New York as an actor on Broadway, but didn't have any real big, certainly not starring credits to speak of in films. And so Wyler cast her and really, kind of discovered her in a way. And this is an incredible, performance that really shows who she was, and she really captivated so many people, and it was the start of a great career for her. Anyway, she plays this princess who is on this diplomacy tour, and she's just totally stressed out. It doesn't seem fun. They show her like meeting a whole bunch of dignitary people, and she just has to greet every single one of them in this long line of people, and this is just one day, and you're like, oh man, this looks exhausting. And she, slips one of her shoes off, and then she can't get it back, and just silly stuff like that. So anyway, she's done with the day. She goes back to her room. She's totally stressed out. The doctor they have with her gives her some kind of shot. We don't know exactly what it is, but he tells her that, you need to relax and just do whatever you want to do. And whatever he said to her in the moment with that drug taking hold, she decides to sneak out, and she sneaks away from this villa where she's staying, ends up on a park bench somewhere, and gets picked up, sort of run into by Gregory Peck, whose character is a reporter who's just been playing a late night poker game. He tries to get her a cab home, but she can't really say where. She's kind of loopy, she seems drunk. And she can't tell him where she lives, and she can't tell the cab driver, and the cab driver's like, this is not my problem, this is your problem. So he ends up taking her back to his room, and, she ends up sleeping there, and he gets up the next day. He and his fellow reporters have this, very important interview with the princess, and he wakes up late. He still doesn't know who she is. He doesn't know what the princess looks like. He goes into the, newspaper office, and his editor says, the interview's been postponed because of sickness. And then he sees a picture of her, and he's like, oh my God, I have her back at my place. And he makes a bet with his editor that he can get an exclusive interview with her. And he said, how much can I get paid for that? They're like $5,000. And the editor's like, I'll bet you $500 you can't get that interview. And he's like, I will take that bet. And so he goes back to his apartment now, or his little room, and now has decided, he's going to, under the guise of pretending he's not a reporter, he's going to interview her and do a day in the life with her, which she initially bristles at, but eventually comes around to, and they end up spending a wonderful day together with he and Eddie Albert, his friend and photographer, journalist, who's great in this. They really have a good rapport together. Eddie Albert is a delightful character actor, and Gregory Peck at the time was looking to do something a bit more comedic. He'd been doing a lot of serious roles, and this is a very light film. But this is a beautiful 4K in black and white. I love 4K black and white. It is something special for sure. But anyway, it's a movie that's, one of those man has ill intentions at first, and then starts to fall for girl, and girl still falls for guy, and he has to reveal things to her, and blah, blah, blah. It's a really delightful story, and it's one I understand its classic status completely. So the 4K looks good. It also comes with a Blu-ray inside. So you get your 4K and your Blu-ray. This is a case where the 4K does not have features and the Blu-ray does. And I will go through those. There's a digital code here for this, and there's a digital code for Ferris Bueller. You get the 4K UHD digital code as well. But so Roman Holiday has and I love these. These are very short, but Leonard Maltin always does a great job. They're called Filmmaker Focus. Leonard Maltin on Roman Holiday. In this case, it's 7 minutes. Usually they're 6 to 8 minutes, but he really packs a lot into that 7 minutes. He'll talk about the director, he'll talk about the studio, the actors, and just puts it together he's a pro, obviously, and I just get a lot out of that 7 minutes, that he gives, and so it's very enjoyable to have that. I believe this Blu-ray may be pretty much the same as, I don't know if there's a new scan for the Blu-ray, honestly, as the previous Blu-ray release, but it's got a lot of nice features, probably about an hour's worth or so. So that 7 minute Filmmaker Focus, we have Behind the Gates Costumes, which is a 5.5 minute featurette with Randall Thropp, who's an archivist, talking about the costume department at Paramount. He sort of walks through the department, talks about the history of the department. Very nice stuff. Rome with a Princess, 8 minutes and 57 seconds, a featurette highlighting Rome and the location used in the film, the Roman locations. Then and Now. That's kind of neat to see. Audrey Hepburn, The Paramount Years. Now, this is pretty extensive. This is almost 30 minutes, 29 minutes, 55 seconds. And it's an in-depth look at Audrey Hepburn and her career at Paramount. Actor Stephanie Powers is interviewed, as well as some film professors, to talk about her and her career. And that's a really nice feature for sure. Then we have Dalton Trumbo, From A-List to Blacklist. I forgot to mention that this movie is written by Dalton, co-written by, I think there was another credited screenwriter, but Dalton Trumbo's name was, of course, taken off, or he had a ghostwriter or something that stood in for him for many years, and I think his credit was finally restored in the early 2000s, and now I think the print even has it. I don't know I can't remember if that's the case, but this is an 11-minute, about 12-minute featurette highlighting his career as a screenwriter, great screenwriter, his struggles with HUAC and the Blacklist and so forth, and very enjoyable stuff. Good to get a background on him. Another reason why this movie is so good is he's part of the writing behind it. Paramount in the 50s is another featurette that's about 9.5 minutes. That's a highlighting all the great films Paramount made in the 50s, starting with Sunset Boulevard. Remembering Audrey, that's about a 12-minute piece talking to her son, Sean Hepburn Ferrer, and a man named Robert Wolders, who's listed as Audrey Hepburn's companion. I guess he was maybe a boyfriend or literally a companion with her later in life. And they sort of recollect their memories of the great actor, Audrey Hepburn. So that's a nice way to close out the disc. But like I said, both Ferris Bueller's and Roman Holiday look very nice in 4K. Very glad to see Paramount continuing this series of 4K releases, and they have a ton of great stuff to put out, so I hope to see more of these in the future. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening, and I will talk to you soon. Bye-bye.